In the dust-choked expanses of the Arizona desert, a solitary man was digging his own grave, not for a body, but for the soul that once thrived within him. This was Jonah Callahan, a rancher turned recluse, whose life had become a slow descent into despair after the loss of his wife. For years he had weathered the brutal winds of the West alone, his heart buried beneath layers of sorrow and regret. Jonah's ranch sat like a forgotten relic against the backdrop of jagged mountains, surrounded by a sea of golden sagebrush and the relentless sun that beat down with an unforgiving intensity. Each day had blurred into the next, filled with the repetitive tasks of ranch life that dulled the edges of his grief, yet deep down he could feel the weight of his solitude pressing heavier upon him. As Jonah swung the shovel into the hard earth, the sound echoed through the stillness, a stark reminder of the emptiness that surrounded him. He paused, wiping the sweat from his brow, and gazed toward the distant horizon, where the sky met the land in a hazy embrace. The world around him seemed to hold its breath as if waiting for something to shatter the silence. And then it happened. From the shimmering heat waves emerged a figure, frail and soaked from the monsoon rains that had swept across the desert landscape. As Jonah squinted against the sun, he saw a woman, her clothes clinging to her skin, dark hair plastered against her forehead. She stumbled, her feet barely finding purchase on the parched ground, before collapsing at his feet. Jonah's heart raced as he dropped the shovel, the dust swirling around him like a ghost of his past. He rushed to the woman's side, his instincts kicking in. She was an Apache, her features etched with the pain of survival, her breath shallow and labored. In that moment, Jonah felt the shackles of his own grief begin to loosen, the weight of his solitude challenged by the vulnerability before him. But his instincts were quickly met with a wave of hesitation. The world outside his ranch had little compassion for a Native American woman, especially one who had stumbled upon a white man's property. The prejudices of the townsfolk were like a rattlesnake's bite, quick, lethal, and without mercy. Jonah had seen enough in his years to know that helping her could invite trouble he wasn't prepared to face. Yet, as he knelt beside her, her eyes flickering open to meet his, he saw something that stirred the remnants of his humanity. Fear, desperation, a plea for help. The internal battle raged within him, the voice of reason whispering to turn away, to let her suffer the consequences of a world that had long deemed her unworthy of mercy. "Why should I help?" he murmured, though he already knew the answer. He had lived long enough in the shadows of his own past to recognize the echoes of suffering. Each wound he had endured had only served to deepen his understanding of pain, and now here was a chance to reclaim a fragment of his lost self. "Help me," she gasped, her voice a fragile thread against the wind. Those two words ignited a fire deep within Jonah's core. He took a breath, the weight of his decision pressing down like the unforgiving sun. The choice was no longer just about him, it was about her, about standing against the tide of hatred that threatened to drown them both. He nodded, though the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. "All right," he finally said, his voice steadying. "I'll help you." As Jonah carefully lifted the Apache woman into his arms, he was acutely aware of the magnitude of his choice. He carried her into the safety of his modest home, a decision that would set off a chain of events he could hardly foresee. What he didn't know was that the moment he had chosen to act was the moment he had stepped into a larger conflict, a struggle that reached far beyond his isolated ranch. Outside his door, the world was changing, and with it came the dark shadows of corruption and greed that preyed on the vulnerable. Just then, a figure appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the setting sun. Jonah squinted, recognizing the unmistakable outline of Sheriff Clay Evans, a man whose reputation for enforcing the law was only rivaled by his penchant for exploiting it. Evans had his own motives, and a Native American woman in Jonah's care would provide him with ample opportunity to settle old scores. Jonah's heart sank as the sheriff approached, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. He had seen Evans manipulate the law for his own gain, turning the town's prejudices into a weapon. The stakes were rising, and Jonah could feel the ground shifting beneath him. "You got a visitor, Jonah," the sheriff drawled, a hint of malice in his voice. "I hope she ain't trouble." Jonah stood firm, defiance igniting within him as he took a step forward, the Apache woman still cradled in his arms. In that moment, the true weight of his moral choice crystallized. He was no longer just a reclusive rancher haunted by his past. He had become a protector, a beacon of resistance against the darkness that loomed on the horizon. But would he have the strength to face the storm that was brewing? Would his choice to help the vulnerable Apache woman lead to redemption, or would it seal his fate in the unforgiving world of the Old West? As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Jonah Callahan stood at the precipice of a new chapter, unaware that his life was about to intertwine with forces far greater than his own. The grave he had been digging might just be the starting point of something much more profound than despair, a fight for justice that would change everything. Jonah felt the sheriff's gaze bore into him, a predator sizing up its prey. "You sure know how to pick 'em, don't you?" The sheriff leaned against his horse, a sneer curling his lips. Jonah tightened his grip on the Apache woman, the weight of her frail form anchoring him to the ground. "What do you want, Sheriff?" His voice was gravelly, a mix of defiance and dread, for he knew the man before him had a reputation for cruelty. "Just wanted to welcome you back to the land of the living," the sheriff replied, eyes glinting with malice. "But I reckon you're just asking for trouble, harboring a creature like that. Folks around here won't take kindly to it. You'll be dragged down with her. You think I'll let that happen?" Jonah's heart raced. He could sense the townsfolk gathering, whispering like the wind through the tall grass. He was no fool. He understood the danger of crossing paths with the lawman. But what choice did he have? The Apache woman's breath was shallow, her life hanging by a thread. "Leave her be," Jonah said, his voice steady despite the tremors in his soul. "She needs help." "Help? That's a mighty generous word for a squaw that's done nothing but bring death and despair," the sheriff shot back. "You're risking your neck, Callahan. Are you willing to stand against me for her?" Jonah's mind raced back to the tragedy that had claimed his family, the helplessness that had swallowed him whole. This moment felt eerily familiar, and he couldn't allow history to repeat itself. "I won't let you harm her," he said, a fierce resolve igniting within him. The sheriff's smile faded, replaced by a cold stare. "You've made your choice, Jonah. But remember, choices have consequences." He turned to the gathering crowd, fanning the flames of fear and prejudice. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. A white man siding with a savage is a man who's digging his own grave." As the sheriff rode off, Jonah felt the weight of the townsfolk's eyes upon him, a mixture of pity and contempt. But he would not falter. With the Apache woman still cradled in his arms, he turned back to his home, determined to find a way to save her. Inside, he laid her gently on a cot, her skin clammy and pale. Days passed like shadows creeping across the land, each moment a test of Jonah's resolve. He tended to her with care, using the remedies he had learned from his mother long ago. She would sometimes stir, a flicker of life in her dark eyes, but the fever raged on, a relentless tide threatening to pull her under. Then, one stormy night, as the wind howled like a wounded beast outside, she finally spoke. "Save me," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, "but they will come for you." "Who will?" Jonah asked, his heart pounding. "The sheriff and others. They fear you." Her eyes glistened with a knowledge deeper than words. "You stand between them and what they want." "What do they want?" Jonah pressed, the urgency of the moment driving him forward. "They want land and blood," she said, her breath hitching. "They will use the people against you. The truth is a weapon, Jonah. You must uncover it." In that instant, clarity washed over him, merging with a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. The Apache woman, whose name he learned was Ayana, was not merely a victim. She was a link to a broader struggle, an emblem of resistance against a tide of greed that threatened to consume all in its path. With renewed determination, Jonah began to devise a plan. He knew he had to delve deeper into the sheriff's operations, uncover the corruption that festered beneath the surface of their town. The following morning, as dawn broke over the rugged terrain, Jonah set out to find allies, people who understood the stakes and were willing to stand against the sheriff's tyranny. As he rode into town, his mind raced with possibilities. He would speak to the few he trusted, the ones who had seen through the sheriff's facade. But just as he dismounted, a voice called out from the shadows, a familiar tone laced with urgency. "Jonah, we need to talk." It was Clara, the local shopkeeper, and one of the few who had always treated Jonah with respect. Her eyes were wide with concern as she approached. "I heard what you did. The sheriff's got plans, and he's not the only one who's been watching you." "Then we're in this together," Jonah replied, a sense of solidarity swelling in his chest. Clara nodded, determination etching lines across her face. "We can't let them take what's ours, Jonah, but we need proof of their conspiracy. We need to expose them before it's too late." And just like that, the lone cowboy who had been digging his own grave found a flicker of hope amid the darkness. The fight for justice was beginning, and with newfound allies by his side, Jonah Callahan was ready to confront the storm. Jonah and Clara stood in the dusty street, the weight of their resolve heavy in the air, as the sun began to dip low, casting long shadows across the ground. They knew that every moment counted. The sheriff was not just a man, he was a symbol of corruption that tainted the very essence of their community. They needed to gather more than just whispers of discontent. They required hard evidence of the sheriff's vile dealings. Clara's voice trembled slightly as she said, "I've heard talk of a meeting tonight at the old mill. The sheriff's men, they gather there to discuss their next moves. If we can get in there and listen, maybe we can find something we can use." Jonah felt a spark of defiance ignite within him. "Then that's where we'll go. But we'll need to be smart about it. Can you rally anyone to join us?" "Leave that to me," she replied, her eyes narrowing with determination. "I know a couple of good men who owe me favors. They'll stand with us." As the shadows deepened, Clara slipped away, while Jonah set about preparing for the night ahead. He gathered supplies, ensuring he had his rifle and enough ammunition. The evening air was crisp, and Jonah felt a strange sense of camaraderie as he readied himself for the confrontation. The moon was a sliver in the sky, casting a faint glow as they approached the old mill. Jonah's heart raced, knowing they were treading on dangerous ground. They slinked around the back, ears straining to catch the muffled voices from within. As they pressed their backs against the cool wood, Jonah exchanged a look with Clara, silently assuring each other of their resolve. The sounds of laughter and coarse banter drifted through the cracks. Jonah could almost smell the smoke of cheap cigars mingling with the stench of whiskey. Suddenly a loud voice rang out. "Boys, I'm telling you, if we don't take care of those filthy savages soon, they'll keep coming for what's ours. We can't let this land slip through our fingers, not to the likes of them." Jonah's blood boiled. The sheriff's true colors were being laid bare before him. Just then a figure stepped into view through a window, silhouetted against the flickering light. It was the sheriff, flanked by several of his men, their faces twisted in greed and malice. "Don't worry," the sheriff continued. "I've got a plan that'll make sure they know their place. We'll create a situation they can't escape from. Make it look like they attacked us first. Then we'll put 'em down for good." Jonah's breath hitched in his throat. This was worse than he'd thought. The man was not merely a tyrant, he was a monster, willing to use the blood of innocents to fuel his ambition. "We need to get this information back to the others," Clara whispered urgently. "But we have to be careful, they're dangerous." Just as they prepared to retreat, a figure emerged from the shadows behind them. A tall, lean man with a weathered face stepped forward, raising a hand in peace. "Hold on now," he said. "I know you two. You're Jonah Callahan and Clara Mason. I've been looking for you." Jonah's instincts flared, ready to draw, but the man continued. "I'm not here to harm you. My name's Silas. I've got information that could change everything. The sheriff's not working alone. He's got support from higher up the food chain." Intrigued yet wary, Jonah nodded, lowering his rifle. "What do you know?" Silas stepped closer, glancing back at the mill. "I overheard them talking about a shipment of arms coming in next week. It's all part of a plan to drive the Native Americans out for good. We can't let this happen." Jonah felt the knot in his stomach tighten. He realized that the sheriff's conspiracy was far-reaching, threatening not only the Apaches but the very fabric of their society. "Then we need to expose him. We need to act before that shipment arrives." Silas glanced around, sensing the urgency. "I have friends who can help, but we'll need to move fast and be smart. They're watching, always watching." The three of them huddled together, voices low but fierce. They knew the stakes were higher than ever, that the lives of many depended on their success. With the sheriff's plans laid bare and an ally at their side, Jonah felt a renewed sense of purpose, the fight for justice now igniting into a full-blown rebellion. As they slipped back into the shadows, the weight of their choices hung heavy in the air. Jonah knew the path ahead would be fraught with danger, But for the first time in years, he felt the sting of hope cutting through the darkness. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the rugged terrain as Jonah and Silas made their way back to the homestead. They felt a palpable tension in the air, as if the very land was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to break. But as they neared the homestead, the silence shattered like glass. A figure loomed against the twilight, the unmistakable silhouette of Sheriff Wainwright, his men flanking him like vultures circling their prey. Jonah's heart raced. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The sheriff's cold smile sent chills through the air, a mask hiding the true malice beneath. "Evening, Jonah," the sheriff drawled, his voice smooth but laced with venom. "Heard you've been asking around about a certain shipment. Dangerous business, that. Might get a man hurt." Jonah stepped forward, fists clenched, resolve hardening in his chest. "What you're doing is wrong, Wainwright. You're using fear and hatred for your gain." The sheriff chuckled, a harsh, mocking sound. "And what are you going to do about it? Stand there with your righteous notions while the world moves on without you? You're a relic, Jonah, a fading star in a darkening sky." From behind Jonah, Silas tensed, and the two vulnerable Apaches huddled closely, sensing the danger that hung thick in the air. They were counting on Jonah, and that weight felt heavier than any he'd ever carried. "Your time is up, Wainwright," Jonah stated, his voice low but steady. "We know about your plans, the arms shipment. We're not afraid of you." The sheriff's expression darkened, eyes narrowing to slits. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you? But you don't know the half of it." He waved a hand and his men shifted, ready for violence. "You've made a powerful enemy today, my friend." And just as Jonah prepared for the worst, a voice broke through the tension, high and fierce. "Stop right there!" It was one of the Apaches, standing tall despite the odds, a fire burning in his eyes. "You think you can threaten us? You are the ones who should be afraid." Jonah's heart skipped a beat as the sheriff's face twisted in shock. "What did you say?" He stepped back, disbelief morphing into fury. "Who do you think you are?" The Apache straightened his back, revealing a necklace of silver and turquoise that glinted in the fading light. "I am not just any man. I am Taji, son of the chief. Your arrogance blinds you, Wainwright. Your greed has stirred a hornet's nest you cannot hope to contain." The air crackled with tension as Jonah realized the full weight of Taji's words. This was not just a fight for survival. It was a fight for honor, for identity, for the soul of a community that had suffered too long under the thumb of tyranny. Wainwright's face flushed with rage, but beneath the anger, a flicker of fear sparked. "You think you can challenge me? I control the law here. I am the law." Jonah stepped forward, his voice steady and resolute. "The law cannot protect you when the truth comes out. We're not backing down, and we will not let you destroy our lives for your greed." In that moment, a realization dawned upon Jonah. Exposing Wainwright's conspiracy could rally the community against him, turning fear into rebellion. The sheriff wasn't just their enemy. He was a threat to every man, woman, and child in the region. "Let's see how long you can hide behind your badge when the people find out what you've done," Jonah said, feeling the tide of courage rise within him. "It's time for the truth to come to light." As the standoff reached its peak, the weight of their choices pressed down heavily. They were on the edge of something greater than themselves, a movement born from the ashes of despair. And at that moment, Jonah knew they would fight, not just for the Apaches, but for the very soul of the West. The stakes had never been higher, and the battle for justice was just beginning. Jonah and the gathered villagers felt the tension crackle in the air, a storm of uncertainty and resolve building within them. Wainwright's face twisted with indignation, his eyes darting around as if searching for allies in a room full of enemies. The sheriff, once a figure of unyielding authority, stood now on the shaky ground of his own making. The weight of the moment pressed on Jonah, but he knew he had to act. He called upon the villagers, urging them to stand together, their voices rising in unison against the oppressive silence that had long shackled them. They were not just bystanders anymore. They were a force to be reckoned with. In the days that followed, Jonah worked tirelessly to gather evidence, reaching out to those who had suffered under Wainwright's tyranny. The whispers of discontent grew louder, spreading like wildfire through the dusty streets of their small town. Neighbors who once kept their heads down began to share their stories of oppression, of how Wainwright had twisted the law to suit his greed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the land, Jonah found himself at the Apache camp once more. He spoke with the widow, her eyes reflecting the pain of her past, yet also a glimmer of hope. "We need your story," he said. "Your truth. It can turn the tide." Together they crafted a plan. The widow would share her tale at the upcoming town meeting, a gathering that would draw in townsfolk and outsiders alike. It would be a moment of reckoning, the kind that history remembered. Jonah knew that if they could expose the sheriff's corruption publicly, they could unite the townspeople against him. As the day of the meeting approached, an undercurrent of fear intertwined with their resolve. Wainwright had his men, and they were known for their ruthlessness. Jonah prepared the widow, encouraging her to speak not just of her personal grief, but of the broader injustices faced by her people. "Your voice carries weight, more than you know," he told her, and she nodded, gathering strength from his belief in her. Then, on the eve of the meeting, Jonah received a tip that chilled him to the bone. A group of Wainwright's enforcers planned to silence the widow before she could speak. They intended to intimidate her, to snuff out the flicker of rebellion before it could spread. The weight of the world rested heavily on Jonah's shoulders, and he knew he had to act quickly. He gathered a small band of trusted allies, men and women who had come to believe in the cause. Under the cover of night, they made their way to the Apache camp, determined to protect the widow and her people from the impending threat. As they approached, the tension in the air thickened, the quiet of the night amplifying their every step. When they arrived, they found the widow pacing anxiously, her expression a mix of fear and determination. Jonah laid out the plan. They would set a watch, ensuring that no harm would come to her before the meeting. They would stand as one, a united front against the shadow of oppression. As they prepared for the confrontation, Jonah felt a sense of purpose swell within him. The fight was no longer just about survival. It was about justice, about standing against the tide of hatred and ignorance. The dawn of a new era loomed on the horizon, and he could almost taste the freedom that awaited them. But as they took their positions, Jonah could not shake the feeling that Wainwright was watching, his eyes lurking in the shadows, ready to strike. The final showdown was near, and with it, the truth would finally emerge from the darkness. In the heart of the storm, Jonah steeled himself, knowing that bravery often meant walking into the unknown, and that sometimes the greatest battles were fought not with guns, but with unwavering courage and the relentless pursuit of truth. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Jonah felt the cold grip of unease settle in his gut. The world around him seemed to hold its breath, the silence interrupted only by the distant calls of waking birds. He knew today would be the day when everything would change, for better or for worse. The widow moved with a grace that belied her circumstances, her eyes scanning the terrain as if searching for the ghosts of her past, while Jonah's resolve solidified. They had prepared as best as they could, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead weighed heavily on them. He had found purpose in this fight, but he also felt the specter of doubt whispering in his ear. They gathered close, the widow sharing tales of her people, stories of resilience and survival against the relentless tide of oppression. Each word she spoke seemed to ignite a fire within Jonah, reminding him why he had chosen to stand by her side. But he also felt the weight of the world pressing down on them, a reminder that Wainwright was a cunning adversary, with resources at his disposal and men willing to do his bidding. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Jonah caught sight of movement in the distance, the silhouette of men on horseback, dust swirling around them like a storm. Wainwright's gang had arrived, and with them, the tension in the air thickened once more. Jonah's heart raced as he signaled the widow to stay behind him. "This is it," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "Remember, we stand together." The widow nodded, her expression shifting from fear to fierce determination. The men approached, their demeanor oozing arrogance and menace. At the forefront rode Wainwright, a man whose very presence seemed to darken the day. Jonah could see the smirk on his lips, the glint of malice in his eyes. He had come to collect, and he wasn't leaving without a fight. "Look what the wind blew in," Wainwright called out, his voice dripping with contempt. "A lonely cowboy playing hero. You think you can protect her?" He gestured to the widow, and Jonah felt a surge of anger. "Protecting her is not a game, Wainwright. It's a matter of honor," Jonah replied, his voice unwavering. The tension crackled between them, a palpable force ready to explode. Wainwright's men spread out, forming a semicircle, their hands hovering over their weapons, ready to draw at a moment's notice. Jonah's heart pounded in his chest, but he remained rooted in place. "Honor?" Wainwright scoffed, his laughter echoing through the canyon. "Honor means nothing in this world. What matters is power, and you're standing in the way of mine." As their words clashed in the morning air, Jonah's mind raced. He knew that a confrontation would lead to violence, and violence would only serve to strengthen Wainwright's grip on the land and its people. Instead, he needed to outsmart the man, to expose the truth that lay beneath the surface of Wainwright's power. "Let's make a deal," Jonah called out, surprising even himself. "You want the widow? You want her people's land? I can help you, but you need to listen." Wainwright's brow furrowed, curiosity peeking through his arrogance. "What do you have in mind, Cowboy?" Jonah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "We've got something you don't. Knowledge of your dealings, your corruption. You may have men and guns, but you underestimate the power of the truth." Wainwright's expression darkened, the glimmer of fear masked by bravado. Jonah could see the gears turning in his mind, the realization that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as untouchable as he thought. With the stakes raised, the path to resolution began to unfurl. Jonah felt the widow's hand tighten on his arm, a silent reminder that they were in this together. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the dust and tension, the air shimmered with potential. They had one chance to turn the tide, and Jonah could feel the weight of the truth resting in his hands, ready to tip the balance. Wainwright's eyes narrowed, and Jonah could see the conflict brewing within him. To retaliate could risk exposure, but to relent could mean losing everything he had built on lies. "What's your angle, Cowboy?" Wainwright hissed, trying to regain control of the conversation. "You know the law ain't on your side. You hold power through fear, but I've got the truth. Let's gather the townsfolk and make this public. You and I will both take our chances, but when the dust settles, your empire of deceit will crumble," Jonah replied, his voice steady, resolute. Wainwright hesitated, glancing at the gathered crowd of townsfolk and the Native Americans standing behind Jonah. They'd come to see justice, and for the first time, he sensed the tide shifting. Jonah pressed on. "Your men can intimidate, but they can't silence what's already been seen. The land belongs to the widow and her people. I'll make sure everyone knows it." With a reluctant nod, Wainwright agreed to Jonah's plan, if only to maintain his grip on the situation. But Jonah knew the truth was on their side. That night they gathered in the town square, the air thick with anticipation. Jonah stood in front of the crowd, the widow beside him, and began to recount Wainwright's exploitation, revealing the underhanded dealings that had gone unnoticed for too long. As he spoke, murmurs rippled through the crowd, disbelief morphing into anger. Wainwright stood at the back, his face contorting as the revelations unfolded. The townsfolk began to realize that their fear had been misplaced. Their allegiance had been to a man who thrived on deceit and division. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the crowd. "We've been blind. We've let this man control us." People began to step forward, their resolve solidifying. Wainwright's bravado shattered as he faced the growing discontent. The very people he'd manipulated were now turning against him. In that moment, the widow spoke up, her voice strong and clear. "Justice is not just for the powerful. It belongs to us all." The townsfolk erupted, emboldened by her words, chanting for accountability. As the sheriff stepped forward, he arrested Wainwright, the weight of justice finally bearing down on the corrupt man. Jonah felt a swell of relief as he witnessed the transformation in the crowd, the shift from fear to unity, from ignorance to awareness. In the days that followed, the widow regained her land, her people welcomed back to a community that had chosen the path of truth and reconciliation. Jonah stood on the outskirts, watching as they rebuilt, feeling a weight lift from his heart. He had acted on principle, risked everything for justice, and in doing so found a sense of belonging he had long thought lost. The Old West was indeed a harsh landscape, but it was also a place where courage could spark change and where mercy could reshape destinies. As the sun set on the horizon, casting a golden light over the rugged terrain, Jonah thought about how easily darkness could consume a soul. But in this story, justice had prevailed through the unity of the oppressed, and mercy had been shown to those who had suffered. In the end, it was not just about one man's fight against another, but about the strength of community standing up against corruption. The Old West had many tales, but this one, woven with strands of truth and resilience, would echo in the hearts of those who dared to believe in a better tomorrow. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was a reminder for us all that in the face of adversity, it is our choices that define us. Will we stand by, or will we rise for what is right?